And welcome to today's conversation, Think Differently About Thinking Differently. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Grace Rodriguez, our CEO and Executive Director, to kick off our conversation. Over to you, Grace.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and thank you everyone who are participating in this conversation today. It's one of the goals of Impact Hub Houston is to build an intentional, inclusive, and international entrepreneurial ecosystem. And a key part of that, obviously, is the inclusion part. We are in Houston, one of the country's most diverse cities. And when we talk about inclusion and diversity, we often tend to think about ethnicity or culture or racial diversity, but there's also this really key element of neurodiversity, and we wanted to make sure that we also provide a platform for people to present their insights and expertise, and are really honored and pleased to share with you two of our members and to have them present their insights and expertise. Jeff Miller with Potentia and Dr. Heidi Steiglitz-Ham of Spectrum Fusion. And so to kick it off, Heidi, I'll pass the floor to you.
Thank you. Okay, that's it. 36 milliseconds. So in less than the sound of a heartbeat, you've already made determinations about me. So you've determined my competence, my likability, my trustworthiness, and even my perceived criminality. So this is something that's different than gender and racial and unconscious bias. It's called attribution bias. This is about how we perceive faces. And so when we see somebody in just that 34 milliseconds, we know, are you a friend or a foe? Do we like you? Do we trust you? Do you look like other people that I know and I like and I trust? And will I hire you? Right? These are all of the questions that we believe that we've answered in 34 milliseconds. Now, Alex Todorov is a researcher at Princeton, and this is his area of specialty. But he warns that even though we think that we know all of these answers, and we're so confident, we're overly confident in these impressions. And the other thing is that these impressions are not stable over time and situation. So even though we feel very confident, this is actually the opposite, that we cannot make these determinations. And so this is what happens every day when we're working with individuals who look differently than us, act differently than us, but we already think that we know what their character and what their personality is like. We also show, the research has shown, that we like faces, we trust faces that look similar to us. So when they've morphed faces and your own characteristics were in the face, in that you were choosing, you like them. And this shows us that one thing that we can do is that we can start meeting and talking and spending time with people who look differently to us, that act differently, that actually, across cultures, expand our networks. Because if we like people who are typical to us, people we see in the workplace, people we see in our home, people we socialize with, then it only makes sense that we need to increase that array so that we do have those opportunities to actually have people who look different be our typical, right? So that we know about that. And then the other thing is that, I don't know, there's the Oakland A's, actually, what they've done, the Billy Bean, and I don't know anything about sports, but he decided that he was going to not look at any of the faces of the baseball players and only look at their stats, and all these players that the scouts passed up, he chose, and they were a winning team. And I love that story. Okay, so this leads us to the idea that there isn't one standard way that people look, that how they act, and that there's not a standard brain. And I like to say no brain is the same. And this is the idea that of neurodiversity, where we have an unlimited variation in neurocognitive functioning across a population. We have the neurodiversity movement, and I'll talk a little bit about this. But this, I love this graphic design. And this was created by somebody in Australia for me. And it represents, and she's on the autism spectrum, but to her, this represents her scattered emotions, but her perception of color and light and sound. And I just think it's a beautiful representation of how we may all have different ways that we perceive the world, how we want to express ourselves and our ideas, and to really be able to think about how we can come together as a community to bring these gifts and talents to the world. And so neurodiversity is this, what I was saying about having an infinite variation, but also knowing that it's not only people on the spectrum. We could have individuals who are dyslexic or have ADD or dysgraphia, dyspraxia. So there's many different avenues or different kinds of umbrella. There's an umbrella term, but different areas underneath. But the other thing is the movement, is which I was alluding to. That's where we are now saying, okay, we have individuals that have gifts and talents and strengths, and now let's find ways that we can actually bring these gifts and talents to the world, that we can actually have safe places where they can feel free to express themselves in the way that works for them. And 1.2 billion people in the world would identify as being neurodivergent. That's another word that either you're neurodiversity, neurodivergent. If you're on the spectrum, that means you could be on the autism spectrum, but neurodivergent, the neurodiversity umbrella of the neurodiversity movement. So 2.2% of individuals have may be different, may have cognitive functioning that is different than their typical peers. And so this is something now that we're seeing more and more that people are, I'm so happy about that. They're bringing this into the light. And so what we're saying is, instead of viewing people through the lens of disorder and disability, let's view individuals through the lens of opportunity and possibility. And this is how we live our lives at Spectrum Fusion. And I know many other organizations and communities are now living their lives like this too. So many adults on the spectrum, even though they have gifts and talents and hopes and dreams, they're languishing on the fringes of society. And so this is somebody that I worked with in Milwaukee when I was doing my PhD. Even though it was in Edinburgh, I collected data there, and I'm still in touch with their family. But they are disconnected, many of them, isolated, and not reaching their full potential. And this is one of the reasons that it's so important to have a community approach as well. But 85%, and this is these statistics, this is coming out of Drexel University, but of adults on the spectrum are unemployed, but many are underemployed. So meaning that they may have degrees that, they may have master's degrees and PhDs, but they are collecting grocery carts at Kroger, for example. But then dyslexia, I think that's 50%, and ADD, that's 30% are unemployed, but 85% for adults on the spectrum, and that's high. That's higher than any other of the categories. One of the participants in Australia, so I started this in Australia, and a lot of those individuals and the ones that I start working with, they've lost hope. And they feel that all hope is gone and nothing that they can do seems to make a difference. One of the areas that I'm very passionate about is smashing the stereotypes of individuals that are neurodivergent or on the spectrum, because we often think of those individuals as excelling in math and science or, computer coding. And although we do have those individuals, but we have the rest of the spectrum to consider. So we have the artists and the script writers, we have the videographers, we have musicians, individuals interested in fitness and health, which, a lot of times people think, wow, I don't know. I didn't know about that. And this is a young man named Tristan, and now he has an internship as a PT assistant. So this is why, and so I'm not going to get into all of Spectrum Fusion, but I will talk about our Reactor Room program briefly. But this is why I launched the Reactor Room program, which is the first think tank or Shark Tank for adults on the autism spectrum, who have a skill, a talent, a passion, or an idea that they wish to explore, but they don't have any way to achieve that. They're stuck, or they don't have any connections or opportunities. And so so what this is, the React Room it's a social impact initiative. So we remove the financial barriers to access for connections and opportunities. And then we harness the power and the energy of community, bringing individuals together and sharing ways that we can find new roads for them. So the idea is that we have, so this was a React Room in March, 3 different participants. And so we have the React Room program, and then we have the event. And so this is for the event. And so prior to the event, I work with these individuals and we determine, what it is that they want to pursue, how we're going to go about it, what is the ask, what is the pitch. And then from there, I create a panel just for them of entrepreneurs, community connectors, individuals knowledgeable about their area of interest. And then we come together and share those connections. So the adult on the spectrum will pitch his idea. We have an intro video, and then the activators, those are the panel members, they ask questions. And the feeling in that room, I really can't tell you about the hope and the optimism. And when I first started the React Room program, somebody said, "You're going to do all of this work for just 2 people?" Because I had 2 people coming through. And I said, "Yes, I am." Because then, I would do it for 1 person, but then as they rise up, as they grow, they can then mentor other individuals as well. And that's really what we're seeing happening. So this is, a very bespoke kind of program, but, with customized outcomes. But this is what is needed for these individuals that, one is an inventor. The other one here, Griff, he wants to be a football coach. He knows everything about strategy that you can imagine. And then Mitchell has a master's in forensic psychology. So these are, not your typical avenues that you would imagine. And so that's what the difference is. This is not a job finding service. And so what I'm really excited about is that the React Room can be for the whole community, because not everybody is ready even for a full-time job, especially if they've been isolated and disconnected, and they have anxiety and depression and lack of self-confidence. Sometimes it's just a matter of, wow, I can help with something. I can start building my portfolio. So yes, it could lead to employment, but more often than not, it's leading to internships, maybe a business launch. We have somebody who launched a business line in her jewelry. Ideas, we have inventions. We're pitching our inventions to Center Device Innovation, and then shadowing opportunities where they can learn and grow and develop these skills that are so important before they even get ready for an employment situation. And so that's why I say we double down on our strengths, and we have customized outcomes, and we mind the gap. And then it's patient persistence. So it doesn't mean that they can't have a job working at Goodwill if they want to. But the problem is that sometimes when individuals have jobs that are not in line with their area of interest or strengths, and it's taxing to them, by the time they get home, they may be cognitively fatigued, emotionally exhausted, and they're not going to be interested in pursuing their hobbies. So, for example, people often tell them that creativity is just a hobby and that they need to get a real job. And then this is an article that was written about the React Room and how we're working. And then this is Tristan in the React Room. And I love this. This is just a little bit, but it's showing that how one person can connect you to another, connect to another. And even though if we think that we don't have anything to offer, if we don't think that we know anything about working with people who are neurodivergent or different, it shows that, anybody can play a role. And we all have something that we can offer. We all have time, talent, and treasure that we can give to make the lives of somebody who's different to us better and change their outcomes. And this is Reese, and he came to the React Room, and this is why I want to talk about creativity and innovation. So creativity doesn't mean that it's not the same as innovation, but when you innovate, you're creative. So that's kind of how that goes together. But when I brought the creatives into the React Room, and people were bringing connections and everything, Well, not for the creatives, not for the videographers and the script writers. They didn't know what to do with them. And that's the other thing. So people were like, well, I think that you just have to get a job. And I was listening to this other talk a couple weeks ago, and they said people just need a job they like but they don't hate. I'm like, well, is that really what we're going for here? Everybody needs a first job. I had some funny jobs, but they want career trajectory. They want to be able to move up just like we all do. They all have ways that they want to. So that's why creativity is overlooked and minimized and dismissed, and people say just get a real job. But, creativity is a powerful strength and asset that is sought after around the world. And, so I won't get into it now, but, SAP and JP Morgan and all of those organizations, the big companies, of course, they're recognizing it. But just even on a small scale, sometimes we think, well, that's not real. You can't just go out and get a job being a script writer. Just get your head out of the clouds. So that's why I launched Spectrum Fusion Media, because yes, it's difficult for one person to go out and be a scriptwriter. One person to say, oh yeah, I'm going to be a videographer. It's very difficult. So we're bringing all of that creative talent together. And now we are actually providing services for Johnson & Johnson. They're one of our clients, and we're creating videos for their Caring Crowd platform. And we're doing something else that I'll share about. I'm not going to show you this video because I don't think we have time, but if maybe at the end, but it talks about they're sharing about, how I really like it, but I don't want to take up too much time with this part. And then Spectrum Fusion, we are now officially launching showcase platforms where we are creating platforms for other individuals who are neurodivergent. So our participants who are on the spectrum and have other diagnoses or other differences, they are now empowering other individuals and making something that we're calling showcase platforms, where we have an intro video about them, their bio, their resume, links to their testimonials, and links to their portfolio. This is really important because this puts them in a different position than being in the interview position. They're able to show what they want to show. They're able to give their impression. So it does turn that around on its head. And, it's different than the other thing I want to say about the Reactor Room. So when you're applying for a job and they're looking for different categories, you need to have A, B, C, D. But what we're doing with our creatives is saying, well, what if you're great at X or Q? Like, what can we do with that? And so we're turning it around, right? So these are individuals that are they're not going into a traditional job setting, right? Doesn't mean that they can't have another kind of job, but we're bringing their creative talents together so that they can actually have an income and they can be productive and do something within their creative field and help other people. So we're making promo videos, we're doing these showcase platforms, and this is what, is really exciting. And now I just wanted to show you, these are some photos from the Reactor Room itself, where you can see, we had testimonials and people sharing and giving advice and talking about past successes. And so I just think that captures all of that. This is John Brennick, and I'm going to go. He is from Johnson & Johnson.
Hi, I'm John Brennick from Johnson & Johnson Global Public Health. I am very happy I chose Spectrum Fusion Media to work on this project. It's a very important project, and they are a team of professionals, very enthusiastic. They bring all kinds of talents together, not just the talents I expected for making video, but also helping us actually reshape our content to get the message out better, and even contributing to the content. In fact, one of the pieces of content, this powerful line, really encapsulates the value of what we're doing with this platform.
And I think that's great, because what I think is interesting, when we have these meetings, I bring all of the participants together. So, it's kind of interesting. I'm sort of an employer too. So we're paying them, but then we have clients. So I kind of bridge both of those worlds. And so I never know what they're going to say in these meetings. And so one said, what is your tagline? Because they have this caring crowd. What is it? And then he said something about, empowering global health. And, he said, oh, no, that's not what you need. And he said, well, how about the power to change lives is at your fingertips? And now Johnson & Johnson is using our tagline. So that's so cool. I think that's what it's all about. And I'm just going to leave with one other study and then talk, because again, I think neuroscience and social science and neurodiversity, this all goes together. So Yuri Hassan, he's in Princeton, and he researches how we convey our stories, our knowledge, our memories, our experiences with one another. And so when two people are in a scanner, when one is speaking, the other's listening, he found something remarkable. He found that once they started being in tune and the one was listening to the story, their activation actually locked and started coupling, which is really amazing when you think about the differences in the brain functioning for auditory processing and verbal production is opposite. But this is where it was a higher level cortical functioning where we could actually see they were in sync. So, but we know communication's not always that easy. Sometimes we're talking and nobody really understands what we're saying, or we're trying to get our story across. But the more people were in sync, that meant that they had more understanding. They were in tune with one another. And so then he conducted an experiment where he had two groups, and he said, all right, we're going to read the same story, but the first group, I'm going to tell them one piece of information, and it was about that the wife was cheating. And on the other group, he told the other group, their story was that the husband was jealous. Okay, that's it. Just their own preconceived ideas, what they came into this interaction. They listened to the story, all listened to the same story. That group one, they were all in tune, common ground. Group two, they were all in tune, common ground, but different to each other. So I wrote to Yuri Hassan and I said, what do you think about this? Because this could happen in neurodiversity where, the onus of the burden is always on the person who's different to communicate with us. But what if it's not all their fault that we're not in sync? It's our fault that we're bringing it to the, all of these preconceived ideas to the interaction. So, but if you even think about what does this mean for society, we can't just, talk to people who have the same ideas. That's why if we want common ground with lots of different people so that we can resonate, that we can understand each other, it's important, just like the faces, to get out there, to be with people, to listen to people, to spend time with people who are different to us. And I'll leave this.
Like asking the world for a moment of its time to say, consider us. We have things to offer you. We have these skills that we can't prove to you if you won't give us a moment and past the fact that maybe we can't verbalize it quite right, or maybe that we're acting a little funny. If you can just get over that hiccup for just a moment, let us prove to you that we can do what we say we can do and that we can do it well and that we have things to offer you. It's promoting your strengths rather than demanding recompense for your weaknesses.
And that's was our first participant here in Houston.
Thank you so much, Heidi, especially for that inspirational video from some of the people that you are working with. It's really important, I think, to hear a lot of the stories, especially success stories, so that other people who are on the spectrum can see, I can do it too. If they can do it, I can do it too. It's really important to elevating different people's stories, right? And so people can see how diverse, neurodiverse people are. And with that, we're going to have Jeff Miller from Potentia do his presentation, and then afterwards we're going to have a discussion among the two of them. So if you have any questions for either of them, please feel free to drop them in the chat right now. And with that, Jeff, it's on to you.
Thank you, Grace. And thank you to you and Michelle and for this opportunity. And thanks to Heidi for sharing this hour. And thanks to all of you for joining in. Want to give you just a quick overview on potential. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay. I thought I heard some feedback there. So I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. If I would just ask everyone maybe to mute if you haven't already, and I'll because I'm just hearing a little bit of feedback, but we'll dive right in. And I'm going to move through this relatively quickly, but because we want to get to your questions at the end. So just a little bit about my background. I come from a business background. I was moved to Houston 5 years ago to run a global staffing company. But a funny thing happened, on the way to a career. My son was diagnosed with autism, and it's one of those days as a parent that you never forget. It was, really, upsetting in a lot of ways, but clarifying in a lot of ways, and really created a path for us to help this wonderful son that we have to be his best self. And that really took a kind of year-to-year approach as parents until he got to be about 16. And I really realized that I needed to raise my game and start thinking about, well, what does adult autism look like? I think as parents, we can get kind of locked in to the year-to-year thing. And I just realized that I needed to do some really deep research to figure out how I could help Charlie to be his best self when he was 26 or 36 instead of just 16. And so that led me to a whole number of conversations with a number of experts in the field, including Heidi, by the way, including Dr. Ham, but also people all over the world, business people and people working in nonprofits. And so what began as a project as a parent, ultimately my business brain started listening to these conversations I was having about the strengths of these individuals, and just what Heidi said, how if you look at the DSM and it looks at basically deficit diagnosis, it's missing the entire other side of the equation, strength, and that businesses we're really missing that population, as evidenced by the unemployment rates that Heidi was citing. So I just felt like with my background, my skills, whatever they are, I wanted to put them to use in service of moving the needle on that unemployment rate, which just made no sense to me as a business person, and was just unacceptable to me as a dad. So founded Soetantyo in 2019. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because Heidi did a great job going through a lot of this stuff. But the big emphasis for us is about not only the benefits to the individual, which are immense, right? These are highly intelligent individuals, and if you think about long-term unemployment and what that does for someone who's highly intelligent and knows that they're capable of so much more, it can really be devastating. And it can be incredibly frustrating for them if maybe they've done well in college and then they get out into the world, or maybe college wasn't for them, but they're highly capable, have lots of gifts, and yet those things on the right hand side may be somewhat elusive to them in terms of financial independence, the self-esteem that comes from a career and things like that. But as a business person, we also focus on the real tangible benefits to business. And why businesses would want to engage with this population. A couple of things that businesses that are very tangible that we highlight, and this is true in good markets and bad. Turnover among this population extremely low. So if you're thinking about hiring Gen X or Gen Z, where turnover may be 20-25%, now you've got to create the right environment. You've got to meet these individuals halfway and create a neurodiversity friendly, neurodiverse confident environment. But if you do that, in general, candidates that are neurodiverse are not going to be, necessarily, going across the street for another, $1,000 on their salary. If they're happy and supported, they're more likely to stay where they are. Incredibly productive, pick up new skills faster, And innovation is probably the one that I talk about the most, because you can take a group of really smart people, think a group of, Stanford MBAs, right? And put them in a room, and they're going to come up with really sharp solutions. And yet they may think very similarly if they have similar backgrounds and similar ways of thinking. But if you can drop some neurodiversity into that group of already very intelligent people, drop some really intelligent neurodiverse thought into that group, that's where the magic happens. And so a lot of what we do is encourage companies to understand that there's really never been a better time for neurodiversity, right? We're facing challenges that we've never faced before, unprecedented challenges across a wide array of different areas. What a great time to bring in some creative thinkers to help a business move forward and really be innovative. So some quotes from some of the folks that have gone through our programs. And part of the secret sauce that we find when we do this is that when we introduce neurodiversity into an organization, it benefits the entire organization. So as an example, we recommend strongly that our new hires get a mentor, someone who has done the job before and someone who can help them to be successful. Well, that's great for any new hire. Any new hire would benefit from that. We also say that it's really important that communication is clear and expectations are clear. And these days, with everybody working remotely, or so many of us doing that, that becomes even more beneficial to the entire workforce. So communication improves, diverse thinking. We have a quote here from one of the peers talking about that, and the confidence and the self-esteem that's built when, and I love the quote here about contributing my skills in a meaningful way, enhance my self-confidence for one of our candidates. We've got a candidate, just a quick story. We've got a candidate that was unemployed for 3 years. And we were able to get him not only into a job, but into a career. And he's now making over $80,000 a year. And he just bought his first house. Now that changed his trajectory in his career, but it really changed his life, and it changed the life of his family as well. So, but with that said, and that's a wonderful feel-good story, the employer wouldn't do that out of the goodness of their heart. The employer is doing that because they found a wonderful employee who's delivering great value for them, and they got a great deal out of it. So, a lot of what we do, and I think probably comes from my background, dealing with big organizations. Big organizations want, and small organizations, any for-profit really, they want to do good, but they have to do well. They report their numbers every 90 days if they're a public company. They have to deliver profits, right? So a purely feel-good story, in our experience, does not have the lasting to stick. That's something that really ties to ROI. The fact that this has such a goodwill component to it as well is really just a tremendous added bonus. So how do we do it? How do we further neurodiversity, and how do we move the needle on that unemployment rate? So we've got 3 programs that allow us to work on neurodiversity. One is STARS, that's Spectrum Training, Recruitment, and Support. One is Projects, and one is a potential product. And I'm just going to go through these just briefly with you. So STARS is, and a lot of people are surprised by this, we spend a lot of time training the employer, because our philosophy, first of all, is that we're not looking to change the applicant. We're not looking to change who the applicant is. They have natural strengths, and they have maybe some areas of challenge, and we want to help coach them up and help them be their best selves. But we find that a lot of the training is on the employer side. Employers need to understand how to access this talent, how to interview, onboard, and manage folks on the spectrum. So a lot of our training is employer side. We then recruit candidates to meet the predetermined roles, and then we support both through the process, because we don't want people to just land a job. part of the reason the unemployment rate is what it is that interviewing is so difficult for a lot of neurotypicals. But the other reason is that onboarding doesn't really set them up for success either. So if someone is lucky enough to get a job, they may not keep it if the onboarding is not done in a smart way. So we support both so that job hopefully becomes a career. The second one is analytics. And what we have found is that, especially number one, with COVID and with just the economic cycles such as they are, not everybody is hiring right now. Not everybody has or can do a neurodiversity hiring program right now. We'd love it if everyone could, but most companies are trying to get more advanced technically. And so even if they're not hiring, there's the opportunity to outsource work around IT or analytics. And again, this comes back to the innovation that we were talking about. And this is work that our internal teams do. And they're incredibly innovative. They really do wonderful work. So whether it's machine learning or blockchain or AI, again, our internal teams tend to be pretty technical in terms of what they do. But I do want to underscore what Heidi said. The vast majority of individuals on the spectrum are not STEM candidates, right? They're not. That's not their focus. So when we work with a company, back to STARS for a minute, if they come to us and they say, "Hey, look, we love your program. We'd love to hire some people. We need a bunch of programs." We'll say, "Okay, we can help you with that. We can help you solve that problem." But we educate them and say, "Listen, so many people. The spectrum is incredibly diverse, right? So we'll help you with this, but let's be intentional about the fact that the next pilot that we do, we want it to be non-STEM related. Let's get into another field, another part of your organization." And that seems to work pretty well. Just to give you an idea and so here's some of the projects that we've already been able to accomplish with the team that we've put together. So I mean, again, really talented folks. Just to give you an idea of the innovation that our folks are capable of. Our CIO is a former hospital CIO, and he came to me when COVID happened and said, "Jeff, we're tracking this all wrong." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, we're kind of looking at it like it's a 3-day-old newspaper. All the data's backward looking. We need to look forward, and we need to, we need something more like a weather forecast." And I said, "Sean, that's brilliant. What do we do next?" And he said, "Well, I could build that in 6 to 8 weeks." He built it in 5, right? We now have it up and running in some cities here in Texas and a number of schools. And we're rolling it out nationwide for folks that are interested in reopening or staying open or just working with their students or their employees or their citizens to try and deal with COVID as successfully as they can. So it involves data and symptom checking and routing people to telehealth or testing or any kind of things, and it's all available on your phone. And this is the kind of innovation that we see from our folks. So I know we're running a little bit late on time, so I'm gonna end it there and open it up for questions. Grace, let me hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for sharing that. It's really brought to light a lot of issues within our general community, right? Employer, business, and community. I wanted to share, if you hadn't seen it on the Eventbrite page, in 2018, a Houston Chronicle article highlighted that over the next 10 years, 500,000 autistic teens in the U.S. will age out of local funding support systems, which means we really need to develop better paths to becoming financially independent, as you said, Jeff, earlier, and learning more. How can we help people integrate better into our workforce or help provide other paths to maybe entrepreneurship or freelancing, these other types of solutions that Heidi is working on with Spectrum Fusion and the Reactor Room. So, kind of going to the business side of it, what are some of the business benefits of neurodiversity in the workplace? Jeff, would you like to start, and then we'll go to Heidi?
Absolutely. I think the first one is just access to talent, right? If you talk about this group numbers in the millions, and if your business isn't built to be able to access this talent, then you're missing out. There's a story about Microsoft has hired a couple hundred folks, into that are neurodiverse into roles within the organization in Seattle. Over half of the people that they hired had previously applied and been turned down. And so that just says that, number one, their recruiting process wasn't designed to be able to access this talent. And number two, if Microsoft's missing out on talent in their backyard, what kind of talent might you be missing out on? The other things I think would be innovation for sure, turnover, very low turnover, and the connectivity that comes about when you do a program like this, and again, how it benefits your whole workforce.
Heidi, what have you seen as some of the business benefits of neurodiversity?
So somebody taught me businesses like to listen to WIFM. What's in it for me? So anyway, because yes, it is a social, it's a right thing to do. But when you're presenting to CEOs and, people in high level management, they want to know, like, what's the bottom line, or why should I do this? So yes, like Jeff said, there's many reasons. But JP Morgan and SAP and Microsoft, they have studies now to show, that there's increases in productivity. SAP was sharing about that, the importance of diversity of thought. We know that there's lots of research about teams and the importance of bringing in lateral thinkers. That's really important as well. So that helps. And I think there's an increase in 21% of effective levels, effective executive teams when they bring in diversity. So, and they do increase in terms of how fast. So a lot of individuals, they can learn something very quickly. So there's stories about people who've never known a computer, like a programming, and this is more on the tech side, but like in a couple of weeks, they know how to do it already, and they're teaching other people, so, but again, this is a spectrum. So that's in the business side, but certainly, in businesses that need creativity as well, like we saw with Johnson & Johnson, we came up with a tagline, and he told us that they spent a lot of money on a media team that has been their PR for I don't know how long. And he said the meetings that he had with our team were more insightful and more creative with just our team. So I love that. I think that's it right there.
Yeah, it's amazing. Diverse perspectives actually bring diverse ideas and new ideas that you might not have thought about before. Who would have thunk? But this question from Catherine in the chat, are degree requirements a barrier for neurodiverse individuals, also leads into this bigger question I wanted to ask you too. Can you share what other organizations have done to increase their neurodiverse talent? Jeff, you'd mentioned Microsoft changed some things, and that helped. Heidi, you mentioned before interviewing and some other challenges. What are things that people can do to make sure that they're including neurodiverse talent in their recruitment processes?
So on the degree question, it's a challenge. It is a challenge. So we work with Chevron. And Chevron's been hiring people for decades, and they have degree requirements. And so, we are working with them on trying to loosen those, because at the end of the day, when we start having conversations about, it's really about, can this person do the job, right? It's not about their credentials really at all. It's a moving target. I would say we're making progress on it, but it's still a challenge that, a lot of companies, especially for the white collar jobs, it's shorthand for them. They think, well, got to have the degree. So I think resetting their expectations through assessments, through internships, through creative ways of working to show them the talent of people that, they may have ruled out previously is a big thing. I think the other thing is, where do these candidates get left behind? A lot of times it's in the job description, right? So employers will write job descriptions that are very boilerplate, and they put everything under the sun in a job description. Well, Spectrum candidates, one of the advantages of working with, I can tell you, my entire team is neurodiverse. I'm the outlier on my team. They're incredibly honest, and it's incredibly refreshing. But what you have with that sometimes is they'll self-select out of a role because they look at a job description and it says, well, I have to have, 5 years of this, and I have to have great communication skills, and I have to have all these things that maybe don't relate to the job, and they won't apply. And I'll say, but John, you'd be fantastic at that job, but I don't have this one thing, right? So how you write your job descriptions is big. Interviewing, doing away with panel interviews, and we help companies to figure out how to do this stuff, right? And there's a whole series of things, but the job description, the interview, and then the onboarding process are probably the big three that need to be designed differently if you want a different outcome.
So we actually have many individuals who have degrees, but they have never been able to even get their foot in the door for an internship. And so I think, everything that we were talking about earlier about having people who look different and think different and act differently, to give them a chance. And that's what I think, when 500,000 people, we need to come together as a community, as a society, as a world to provide ways that they can start with internships, but even building their portfolios. So, and I have a young man here, and he wanted to come in and visit, and he wanted to come in and interview. He interviewed then, and but he had selective mutism. He was so anxious. He had severe disfluency, so he couldn't even speak. But I could see that he had a degree from the Art Institute of Houston, so I knew he knew what he was doing. And so, basically, I said, so you want to be a part of this? And he just nodded, and I just said, all right, come on. Well, now you would not believe it. He's the one that anybody needs to make a phone call, they'll say, oh, you do it. But we went to, he had a gala where we presented a video, and he came in wearing these glasses. I may have told you, Grace, but they're from the Japanese glasses without lenses on them. But that day, it was new fill. And he came wearing these glasses. He was all amazing, decked out, and he never took those glasses off again. But just because, but it started at that moment where I didn't make him answer questions in a traditional way. I changed to yes, no. I looked at his background. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, and I gave him a chance. And he's our right-hand man now.
How do the yes-no questions help?
Well, because he couldn't produce, so he could nod his head because he was disfluent and severely anxious. So, I would just say, you know how to edit videos.
Yeah. So that's a really helpful insight to have, because sometimes, we don't know what our assumptions are, versus when we're talking with neurodiverse talent. And so just understanding that you can't expect someone else to be able to produce those answers for you. It doesn't mean that they're any less intelligent or any less talented, but framing it as a yes-no question, that's just something I learned today. So thank you for that. We also have another question.
I just want to amplify one thing that Heidi was talking about that may have been missed in that. The idea of portfolio style interviewing, where you have people bring work that they've done, right, is huge in this process. So at the end of the day, it's about, can they do the work? So if you can give someone that opportunity to show what they've done in the past, to literally bring that work product, or to give them a small project to do to show you, that can be a great way to access talent that you might have otherwise missed. And
that is something that, them building those showcase platforms, that goes along the same line, that they can show you. And you don't have to ask these questions, because when you do ask questions for interviews, often it relies on autobiographical memory, free recall, narrative, so you're testing a lot, working memory, that it's not
anxiety
in what you're doing. So I love that. And I'm so, this has been a long time, because so many companies, they would not budge on this interview. And I don't know if this person's still around, but they were charging $5,000 to help people write a resume and practice the interview. But wouldn't that money be better spent on training or doing something, instead of all that money just for the interview? And parents were paying it.
While we're on the topic of interviews, Kathy in the chat again asked, what are the problems with the panel interviews? Can you describe that process and how it isn't working for neurodiverse people as well?
In our experience, one of the things that we find is that if you can stay on a single topic and let an individual answer that topic, not have sort of multi-part questions, right? But let them dig in and answer that one question, then they'll answer it really well and do better with that. The panel interview number one, it increases anxiety. You're talking to 4 people, 5 people instead of just one person. It increases the chance that someone is going to sort of cut in and it becomes that multi-part thing. And so, generally you want to set these folks up for success in a way that, a panel interview becomes like a performance, right? But you want to replicate what a normal Tuesday afternoon would be for somebody. And in most of these roles, they're not performing Tuesday afternoon. They're dealing with people one-on-one and answering questions. So we want to replicate that, dial the anxiety down, and let them put their best self forward.
One of the things that this conversation is really emphasizing for me too is the idea when you think about human-centered design thinking or the design thinking process, and people always talk about making sure that you put the user first, and if you design for the people who are at the extremes, you actually solve the problem for everybody in the middle as well. And all of the recommendations you are making are also great for introverts like myself. The idea of how do you reduce anxiety for people in the interviewing process and so on, and so that makes me wonder, how can the rest of us, maybe people who aren't employers, but maybe family or friends or just people in the general public, how can we help support and prepare neurodiverse individuals for coming into the workforce or into the spaces that we already inhabit?
I think you want to do things like this where you have an opportunity to educate yourself, right? Because while neurodiversity is gaining traction, it's still a relatively new concept for a lot of people, and there's still some misconceptions around it, like we were talking, right? And then I think you want to advocate within your sphere, whether that's your employer or just your social circle, or just look for ways to design more inclusive environments in the areas where you're working and living. Because the reason that someone may respond to you a certain way may not be for the reasons that you think, and so a lot of these differences are invisible to someone that that you haven't spent any time with before. You would not necessarily know. So I think approaching educate yourself, advocate, and approach every situation with an open mind.
Go ahead.
Sometimes we have no idea what's going on behind the curtain. Like somebody may present and you might not even think that they're anxious, but the amount of effort that they've had to go through to even prepare to come to that interview, it is exhausting. And so, and then there's other research to show about symmetry and how people use both areas of the brain, which helps for creativity, but also increases how hard they're working. They're sometimes at their capacity already. So, when you bring in more like simultaneous, like I was saying, other things at the same time, it can really overload. But the other the very simple thing is that if anybody's interested in learning more about it, is to spend time with people on the spectrum, is to realize, how much fun it is to interact and how I always say they can change your lives in a beautiful way. And it's true. So if you have an opportunity to spend time with different individuals, I think that's the best thing that anybody can do.
Great point.
So in the spirit of that, how can we find, I guess, how can we make the effort to spend more time with neurodiverse individuals? And then what are some things that we need to think about or we need to ask ourselves or be just more aware of when we are interacting with neurodiverse individuals?
Well, one thing that people do is that if somebody has, for example, expressive aprosodia, or they sound a little bit monotone, some listeners misinterpret that as cognitive impairment, and then they start speaking to them in a way that isn't on the same level as their cognitive capacity. So they use a higher pitch voice or speak very slowly. So not to do that. And it's so amazing. You would not believe, like some people who they present with many of the characteristics that would require a diagnosis, or they would be able to get a diagnosis on the spectrum, but they might be very, very capable. But then others who you don't think they look like, oh, well, they don't have any anxiety. They're really, really suffering. And so, one of our participants said, I'm made of glass, but you would never know it. So, I think how you do that. But I think in a way to answer your question, how you can find groups, I know it would depend. For us, we're a community. So we have volunteers, we have ways that you can meet adults on the spectrum, but others, like if it's through research, or you wouldn't be able to do that. So I think to find the different organizations and see how you could fit in or partner or volunteer, work together, or give them a project.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, would you like to add to that?
I think Heidi spoke to it really well, and just again, with the numbers of people that are out there, this is one of those topics I find when I talk to people that if they weren't, Heidi and I live this every day, right? This is what we do, but once you start to factor this into your mind, you'll see it everywhere. You'll see it a lot more places than you think you will. You probably have a family member, who you could approach and seek to understand. Don't freak them out, but if you haven't had that conversation before, approach it, with sensitivity. But you'll see people all over the place that are neurodiverse in your workplace, what's that, honey?
You're right. They're already there in your workplace.
They're already there in your workplace. That's right. One of the interesting things that we find when we do these programs, and some of the people, even the HR people that we talk to, are amazed by this, is when we are intentional and we share with the employer and the population that, listen, we're going to be doing a neurodiversity hiring program. We're going to be intentionally bringing more neurodiverse individuals into the organization. All of a sudden, these individuals who are already in the organization and are neurodiverse start disclosing. They start sharing because they now feel comfortable to do so, where maybe they didn't before, and they want to mentor these new hires that are coming in. It's a really beautiful thing. And so in addition to getting these new hires in, you're helping that individual who might have been employed by you for 10 years to bring their full self to work, where maybe before they didn't feel like they could.
Yeah, I love that idea of how it teaches us to be more empathetic, right? So making sure that we are embracing and being inclusive of neurodiverse talent actually makes us more empathetic across the entire spectrum of humanity in general. I mean, Action shared in the chat, the idea of neurodiversity is a great thing because it forces people to think about the capabilities and humanity of people instead of keeping up appearances, and that people on the fringes of society have always had unique methods and thinking. So, kind of going back again to how when we talk about diversity, it's often racial and ethnic cultural diversity versus also neurodiversity. So in the spirit of that, I want to know more about what are some of the common misperceptions of neurodiverse talent. You mentioned before that there's an assumption that they're all good at math and the things that require analytics, but how diverse are actually neurodiverse talent, and what are we missing? Yeah, Jeff, you mentioned that once we know what to look for, we'll see it everywhere. Well, what are we looking for?
Well, so I think, and I know Heidi can speak to this as well. Number one, these things are not mutually exclusive, right? So neurodiversity goes across all, races and genders and sexual orientations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? There's intersectionality across all of this. So it does not distinguish, right? So you could be autistic, and, I have a very good friend of mine who is African-American, has a teenage son who's autistic. And, she worries about her young African-American son, and all the things going on with police and all the things that we've all been thinking about this year. And add to that the fact that he's autistic and has difficulty communicating and anxiety and some things, right? So these things overlap. I will say, based on what we see and the data that we've seen, women autistics, for example, which just talk about autism, are dramatically undercounted because autism in women tends to show up a bit differently. We know that women develop faster and are more fluid with language, and so may be able to mask better, but that doesn't mean that they don't suffer some of the same issues. They may just be maybe easier to mask, so and people that I've talked to, in that field of study talk about the constant masking that some women autistics do, and they liken it to PTSD, that it's that intense for them to have to be in that behavioral straitjacket, right? So we really want to just allow people to be themselves. And if they stem or if they, show up a little bit differently, so what? Meet them where they are.
And I would just add to that, yes, there are areas that we don't really know that it's underrepresented, women, and also individuals who are homeless. So, this is another passion of mine because I'm working with an adult. He's 65. He missed his autism diagnosis as a child. He is so bright, but a disabled veteran was trying to help him and called me. And so I started meeting him, this is 2.5 years ago, but sometimes I couldn't find him because, is he at the Walmart parking lot or is he here or there? But, then we said, okay, if I can find you, I'll work with you every Saturday. And so we developed a relationship of trust, and now he is living at the Magnificat house in Midtown. But this is another thing. He's part of Spectrum Fusion, but we're helping him, partnering with Work Texas to help him to get a trade to be a welder. So, but how many other people? So there's a few studies about how many people, are on the spectrum who are homeless. And one came out of the UK, and they looked at a cohort, and they could see that they were much higher in the traits. Of course, what about people who are in, the criminal justice system? That's another, we talked about that. So I think in every sector, there's people who have fallen through the cracks in society. And Harvey is his name, and he won't mind me saying, and he said, if you can get me back to society, then we should have a before and after picture, and you can get some funding.
Thanks to Harvey for allowing you to share his story too.
Yeah.
So I'm so sorry. I forgot the time. This is just such an inspiring and educational conversation for me. But we are at the top, and thank you all to all the participants who have been engaged in the chat and shared your questions. Thank you, Jeff and Heidi, so much for sharing what you're working on with us. And then hopefully we'll be able to do a follow-up actually and hear some more stories from the people that you have helped, because again, elevating the stories of people who are being helped and who are finding new paths to financial resilience and to independence. I mean, that can show a lot of other people who are on the spectrum that they are capable of doing it as well. So thank you, Jeff and Heidi. Everyone who's participating or watching, we're going to share the links to both Spectrum Fusion and to Soetantyo Workforce in future emails, and also on the YouTube video when we post this. So please stay engaged, and the best way to help be an ally to people who are on the spectrum and to neurodiverse talent is to start engaging with Spectrum Fusion and Soetantyo. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.